Bienvenidos, Ushamdid, and welcome University of Maryland Global Campus learners from the CMIT-456 Section 6380 course for the fall 2021 semester. This is the Cisco Networking Academy's CCNP ENARSI version 8 course curriculum, and in this packet tracer tutorial and activity, we're going to be taking a look at packet tracer activity 9.2.1, where we're going to be configuring Multiarea OSPFv3. Now, remember, OSPFv3 implies that we're talking about OSPF with IPv6. OSPFv2 was OSPF for IPv4. OSPFv3 is OSPF for IPv6, and where OSPFv3 can become a little bit confusing is we can do both sort of a legacy old school IPv6 configuration with OSPFv3, or we could do the new address family configuration format with OSPFv3. Now, again, the key is that OSPF is writing on IPv6 when we're talking about OSPF version 3. So let's dive into our activity, and of course we're going to go off on a few tangents here and there. I've got some real Cisco routers where we can take a look at some of the sort of OSPFv3 centric commands, sort of the newer syntax, if you will, excuse me, for some of those commands. And here we go. Well, we've got a basic multi-area OSPFv3 configuration here. We've got area 0, area 1, and area 2. You have your addressing table over here to the right. And so let's go ahead and dive in. So here are the instructions. We're going to be configuring OSPFv3, and right now they want us to do that on router A. So router A, even though it's OSPFv3, router A is still an area border router because it borders the backbone area, area 0, along with area 1. So we'll go from user exec to privilege exec into global config with a configure terminal command. And this is something that I always forget. You have to enable IPv6 routing because typically you're going to say IPv6 router OSPF1, right? So this is the difference between the command syntax. So whereas before with OSPF version 2 for IPv4, with OSPF version 3 for IPv6, we simply precede the router OSPF1 command with IPv6. Now, if you hit enter, you'll see that IPv6 routing is not enabled. And again, this is something that I'll end up doing at least once or twice. So you just simply say IPv6 unicast routing. And that is going to enable IPv6 routing so that we can get into the global config OSPF configuration stanza. So now if I was to say IPv6 router OSPF1, you can see that it comes up and now it says Process 1 could not pick a router ID. Now, the reason for this, remember, with OSPF version 2, if you didn't explicitly define the router ID, where you would simply say something like router ID, and here they want us to say 1.1.1.1, in OSPF version 2, if you didn't specify manually the OSPF router ID, like I just did right there, what OSPF would do is it would take a look at your interface IP addresses to see if you had any loopback addresses configured or if you had any physical interface addresses configured with IPv4. Well, remember, this is a pure OSPF v3 configuration. So there are no IP addresses, as you can see here, and that do show IP interface brief confirms the fact that we didn't have any IPv4 addresses, right? So there's no IPv4 addresses like we would use with OSPF v2, and this is all IPv6 in terms of an addressing perspective. So it could not pick a router ID, please configure it manually. And so we just did that and we set it to what they had asked for. So now the question becomes, where is the network command? Well, as you've guessed, the network command no longer exists because we're no longer dealing with IPv4 networks. We're dealing with prefixes, IPv6 prefixes, and prefix lengths, like a /64 or a /48 or a /32, right? So that is why you no longer see the network command here. And so you won't be doing any wildcard masking of any kind. You're going to be going under the interfaces. So let's go ahead and get into interface gigabit Ethernet 00. And here is how you activate the OSPF process under the physical interface configuration, or if it was a logical, like a loopback address. So I'm going to simply say IPv6 OSPF, the process ID, and then we're going to put in the area number, right? And again, very important, the area number must match, right? So we're on router A. This is gig 00 and gig 01. So these interfaces are in area 1. The backbone interface is going to be serial 000. So IPv6, OSPF1, area 1. Now, what we should see happen here is we should see that the neighbor comes up. And so we'll assume that that's going to be router 11 that's out there in that area 1 cloud into which we don't have any visibility. And then we're simply going to go under interface gigabit Ethernet 01, and we're going to run that exact same command because both of those interfaces are in area 1. All right, so it looks like that cloud, at least from what we can tell right now without looking at the link state database or any routing information that we've received to see, what type 1 LSAs we're going to be. And I'll talk about the two new LSA types, the Intra-Area prefix LSA and the link local LSA. So we've got two new LSAs to deal with. Again, sort of adding to the complexity with OSPFv3. And so let's see here. What do we have? We got the router ID, configure each active IPv6 interface with OSPFv3. And so finally, let's jump into serial 000. And we're simply going to hit the up arrow and we're going to change the area because again, this is in the backbone area. That interface is in the backbone area, area 0. Now, we're going to be configuring router B and C, and so what that tells me is we are not going to see an adjacency pop up here just yet, but let's go ahead, let's save the configuration here so I can go in, actually it's do write mem, so we'll just simply say write mem, and let's take a look at the OSPF database. Now, if I say show IP OSPF database, we're not going to see anything because again, IP is implying IPv4. We would need to come out here and say show IPv6 OSPF database. And so what do we see here? Well, since we have adjacencies in area 1, we're going to see the LSAs for area 1. Again, we have an interface that's in area 0, but there's no adjacency there. There's no OSPF v3 activity there yet. So all we're seeing are the LSAs we're receiving from our OSPF v3 speakers out here in area 1. And so what do we see? Well, again, you see the router link states, right? So it's the router LSA. It's the type 1 LSA. All routers within an area will generate a type 1 router LSA. So who are the three routers we know about? Well, they're identified based on their router ID, right? That fingerprint, that social security number, that value that we configure that looks like an IPv4 address that is used to uniquely identify the router in that OSPF area. So there's router 11, here I am router 1, and here is router 12. All right, now the network link states. So yes, on each segment, on each OSPF segment, and we have two here between router A and router, what we'll say is 11, and router A and router 12. And on each of these segments, there will be a DR-BDR election. Now, what would have been a nice little value add to this activity possibly would have been being asked to set these to point-to-point network types. But again, we don't know, do they go directly into the router? Is it into a switch that goes into, that you have a VLAN configured? But if there is no need for a DR-BDR, right, then let's make those point-to-point network type interfaces on router A. And again, we can't do that because we can't change it in these router 11 and 12 configs over here in this cloud. Now, here's an inter-area prefix, right? Or inter-area prefix LSA that I was referring to earlier. And you can see here that the advertising router is me. It's going to be router 1. And here is the prefix and the prefix length. And so it's basically this interface here that's in area 0. Right, remember, it's not intra-area prefix LSA. It's not the new LSA, right? This is sort of, think of it as the type 3 LSA, that we have routing information about an interface that is not in area 1. It is coming from another area. And here it's just simply area 0. It's the transit segment between router A and router B. So now we get down to one of the two new link types. The new LSA types, and it is the link local LSA, right? And what this is, is it's basically, I want you to think of it as like a mapping between the link local address on the interface for these routers. And you can see here, we're talking about, gig 00. They all have link local IPv6 addresses configured, and gig 01 and gig 01. It's a mapping of the global unicast addresses that are associated with each of those interfaces that are listed there. Because remember, with IPv6, you might be saying, okay, well, why throw another LSA type in here, right? This type 8 LSA, why are we doing this? Well, remember, with IPv6, I can put multiple IPv6 addresses on a single individual physical interface, right? And that's really, really important to remember. And so the type 8 LSA with OSPF v3, the link local LSA, is simply mapping any and all global unicast prefixes that are associated with that interface and that link local IP. And let me see here if we can get a show IPv6 OSPF database. And there's the link. And let's take a look and see what we've got here. So if I scroll back up, and we'll take a look here, and interface serial 000. Here is the link local address that is associated with that, right? And there is the IPv6 prefix. Okay, so again, think of it as nothing more as a mapping to keep track of which global unicast addresses are configured on which OSPF v3 enabled interfaces, and it ties them back to the link local address, which is FE80::A, right? And then it's going to do it, again, for all of these interfaces down here. All right, so that's our type 8, and that's what we saw there in the link state database. So let's let's move on and continue our configuration. It's basically saying, hey, repeat steps 1 and 2 and do that for routers B and C. And so let's go ahead and make that happen. So we'll pull router B up and we'll slide this over just a skosh. And let's come back out here and let's get into global config. And again, IPv6 unicast routing, right? We have to have that enabled so that we can say IPv6 router OSPF 1, right? Can't pick a router ID, so we've got to manually configure one. So router B is going to be 2222. Let's double check that. Yep, 2222. Now, I could also on router B say passive interface default, and then say no passive interface serial 000 and no passive interface serial 001. And let's go ahead and say do show IPv6 interface brief and make sure that those are the two serial interfaces we are using here. They are. Excuse me. And then we're going to say no passive interface gig 00, right? So you can still do the passive interface commands, and you would want to do those passive interface commands to make sure you don't have an interface come up mistakenly, right? And actually, well, yeah, that's going to go out. And I was looking at the gig 00. I was like, wait a second, but that's not a LAN interface. So we're going to keep it no passive. All right, and then all we need to do is go interface serial 00, IPv6, OSPF1 area. Now, router B is a backbone router, right? Because all of its interfaces are in area 0. And so that's also going to make this pretty easy. Interface serial 001, IPv6 OSPF1 area 0, and interface gig 0, interface gigabit 00. And there we go. All right, so we've got 3 OSPF v3 enabled interfaces. We should see, there it is. I was just waiting for that. Looks like router 21 out there in the area 0 cloud. And so we don't see that third adjacency between B and C because we haven't configured router C yet. So let's save our config here. And let's say show IPv6 OSPF neighbors. Again, it's instead of saying show IP OSPF neighbor, it's show IPv6 OSPF neighbor. And here you go. You can see that we've got 2 adjacencies. With router 1 and then router 21. And here, right, because it is a point-to-point interface type, so can I say show IPv6 OSPF interface? And absolutely, we can still say that, right? Now, let's take a look in here. Gig 00, that's going to be a, broadcast network type, right? But I was looking for serial 000, which is here. And you can see right here that the state of the interface is point-to-point. And I'm sorry, the network type up here is point-to-point is what we're looking for, right? So it's a point-to-point interface type. All right, so that takes care of router B. Let's pull router C up, and let's complete our configuration here. And then they're going to walk us through some validation commands, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the, I don't want to call it the address family way, but again, it's sort of the newer way to do the OSPF v3 configuration. So we're going to get into global config IPv6 unicast routing. I can't believe I didn't forget to do that at least once. Router OSPF 1, IPv6, router OSPF 1. We need a router ID here, which is going to be 3333. And again, I could say passive interface default and then no passive, but we're going to skip that. And let's just say do show IPv6 interface brief. And we're looking at gig 00, so IPv6, OSPF 1, and that is area 2 on gig 00. And then we've got gigabit Ethernet 01, where we're going to say the same thing, right? Because both of those interfaces are in area 2. We should see 2 adjacencies. We've got router 31, and the numbers are certainly beginning to climb here. And then finally, we're going to bring that adjacency up. Serial 001, and that is in area 0. So routers 31 and 32 are sitting out there in the cloud in area 2, and now we should have a complete configuration. You can see we're at 100%. I'm going to go ahead and say write mem here, right? And there we go. The adjacency has now come up. So what about a show IPv6 OSPF neighbor, right? And there we go. There are the 3 adjacencies. What about a show IPv6 route, right? And here is where we see the inter-area, the OIAs, and again, that still stands for inter-area, and you can see that right there, right? Now, I didn't mention the intra-area prefix, which is a type 9. We didn't see that, well, I didn't talk about it when we were looking at it earlier. And that's just, it'll advertise one or more of the OPv6, the IPv6 OSPF prefixes. Could be a stub, transit network segment, or that are associated with the router, right? So that would be the type 9. All right, so we've got the I was going to say OIA, but you've got the OI, right, which stands for the inter-area, and you can see from the little secret decoder ring up here, that's exactly what we're looking at. And that inter-area prefix, that's still generated by the ABR, right? The area border router generates these, is still a type 3 LSA, right? That's summary LSA. And let's go ahead and do this. So we're at 100%. It's asking us to ping. I'm pretty confident that our pings are going to work. So from router A, if I was to come in here and let's just say ping 2001:DB8:1:Baker 1::2, and one of these is going to work, so we're good there. So again, we took a look at the show IPv6 route. Let's say show IPv6 OSPF, right? And this is going to give us some additional information. Well, with that, we are going to wrap up Packet Tracer Activity 9.2.1, where we took a look at configuring Multiarea OSPF version 3. We looked at not only how to configure it, but we looked at how to validate it, and then we looked at how to dig a little bit deeper into that link state database to learn a little bit more about the Type 8 LSA, and then we talked about the Type 9 LSA, which are the two new LSAs that we're going to be working with, right? That link local LSA, our Type 8, and the Intra-Area prefix, the Type 9. All right, thanks so much for watching, and as always, I hope to see you in the next video.